Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Freya Lemke. I'm the Managing Director of the Brussels office of the German Chambers of Commerce and Industry, DIHK. And I have the pleasure to welcome you to this online event, the European Chips Act, Are We Getting It Right? Organized by Eurochambers, the Association of European Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and DIHK, the Association of German Chambers, together. The European Chips Act is currently being discussed at European level, and it comes timely. The global chips shortage is a fact, is something that our companies have been dealing with for quite a while right now. This is still not sorted out, let's say, with the current geopolitical situations ranging from supply chain disruptions due to the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, etc. Still lead to the fact that companies are faced with shortages, with problems, with new challenges. So the Commission is here to help, they say. They proposed the European Chips Act back in February already to lay out a way forward how to deal with these shortages. And we want to discuss today with you all and with our panelists whether the Commission got it right in their proposal. Is it really what business needs? The need for action is there, as I said, it's confirmed by our companies as well, but there are still a lot of details being sorted out in the political discussion right now. So what is really the business needs to create a stronger semiconductor ecosystem within the European Union? What sizes of chips are needed to ensure security of supply for also the current and the future industries? And are the crisis response measures that are being proposed by the European Commission in the CHIPS Act really appropriate for these goals we try to reach? We have a panel that involves business representatives, that involves European Parliament, that involves the European Commission, that will give you certain views and their perspectives. And we as DIHK have already discussed this in a lot of our committees and fora, actually, where we saw a broad support for an intervention, for a CHIPS Act per se. Something has to be done, business says, but as I said, the devil is in the detail. We see some skepticism when it comes to some concrete measures that have been proposed, that especially concerns the right of intervention then by governments or by the European Commission when it comes to export bans or the sharing of data, etc. During a crisis. Companies call for more industry involvement, for example, in the EU Semiconductor Board. That's what's proposed. We also saw some intense discussions about the size that the European Commission seems to be pursuing here when it comes to the semiconductors for the chips. Is it really the smallest size that we need to subsidize in the first place, or do we need a broader approach? So these are the indications we already got that we want to discuss with you more in detail. And I thank all the panelists for being here with us, and hand over to my colleague Christopher Gosau, who is your moderator today, who will start with some housekeeping rules and will also introduce our esteemed panelists more in detail.
Yes, thank you very much, Freya, for setting the scene. It's a pleasure to be moderating this distinguished panel today. As it was mentioned, just one or two housekeeping remarks. We ask you to, stay mute while we're having the panel discussion, and as soon as you do have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat, or later on when we open the panel entirely for questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll give you the opportunity to ask your questions or give comments. Besides that, I just want to mention that this is being recorded, just for your knowledge. And the scene has been set. We're living in more unstable times in the recent years, especially supply chains have suffered, or their resilience and stability has suffered during the pandemic, as well as the war that we are seeing between Russia and the Ukraine. And therefore, it is a pleasure to discuss today in how far this is affecting especially the semiconductor value chain and what effects that has on the industry, and which measures should be taken in order to improve the situation, but also to give us a long-term stability for this resilience of our semiconductor value chains, and as an effect of that for the rest of the economy. I'd like to introduce our speakers, starting with the Commission. We have the pleasure of welcoming Lucia Scioli, who's Director for Artificial Intelligence Digital Industry at DG Connect with the European Commission. We also have with us from the business side, Michael Boll, who's Vice President and Head of Global Public Policy with Infineon Technologies. We have with us Janine Buddelmann, who's CEO of Buddelmann Electronics GmbH. And finally, we have with us Eva Meidel, who's member of the European Parliament and rapporteur for the EPP on the CHIPS Act. A special welcome to her, who's just published a few days ago her opinion on the CHIPS Act. We'll be very interested to hear more about that. But I would like to start out with Lucia and give her the first chance to present, I guess, similar to the legislative process, to give the Commission the first word and see what, from your side, is the reason why do we need a CHIPS Act and what are the main elements?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. We need the CHIPS Act for some of the reasons that Freya has already introduced earlier. So we noticed that there were shortages. These shortages are a symptom of the fact that the European Union depends excessively on production that takes place outside the European Union and in a very limited number of countries like Taiwan and South Korea. With all the geopolitical tensions that relate to that. What, in particular, what this excess dependency does is that it has created some serious issue in our economy and for our societies, because we often talk about impact on the automotive industry, but you have to know that also healthcare and other kind of industries have been affected negatively as well. So by proposing the CHIPS Act, we have to try to reach three objectives. Basically, in the short term, we want to be able to work together with the member states, looking ahead, trying to increase the transparency of the value chain, which is global and which is incredibly complex, to be able to anticipate and, if possible, address the shortages that our economy may face. In the medium to long term, we would like to make Europe a more attractive place to invest, in particular in production facilities, because this is an area where Europe is particularly weak. We only have 7% of the global market share. And therefore, we have introduced some rules to adapt our state aid to the reality of the semiconductors, and also, as I said, to make Europe a more attractive place to invest. We think that investment in manufacture is going to spill over to the whole ecosystem, to the design, to the equipment suppliers, and really to the full ecosystem of semiconductors. And then in the long run, we think we have to continue strengthening our technology leadership, because we have very strong research organizations. So we have proposed a new program that we call the Chips for Europe initiative. So this is a new program we would like to manage through our joint undertaking in semiconductors, and look ahead and being able to develop the know-how to be able to not only use, but also develop and master the chips that we will need 10 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you for this first introduction to the CHIPS Act. I think we're going to follow up with Michael Boll, or Michael Boll, as we'd say in German. And from the industry side, you're representing Infineon Technologies. Why is it necessary for us to have the CHIPS Act, and what are Infineon's points that we should be making sure are included in the CHIPS Act? I can personally not hear you yet. I don't know if that's a problem on my side or. So far, nope. You seem to be unmuted, so it doesn't seem to be the usual problem of pressing the button.
Is it now? Can you
Yes.
hear me now?
Yeah.
It's the microphone settings, not the muting. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and you just asked what the needs are of Infineon, but I think it is generally for the European chips industry, as we are all joined in the ESIA. We aligned on a broad variety of topics concerning the EU Chips Act. We as Infineon, but also the others, really look forward to the Chips Act in general, and it's a great approach done by the EU Commission in a very short period of time. It is very helpful to strengthen the EU chips industry. Nonetheless, also companies like Intel are going to benefit from this approach. But we as a European company would lose more and more importance if this Chips Act would not kick into place and into power. Other regions and countries are funding their chips industry to a quite high level. There are, for example, China, the USA, South Korea, but also Japan. You can see in Japan that TSMC, the Taiwanese company, has joined an undertaking together with Sony, and they get a 50% funding of their chips factory in Japan. So what we are aiming for is a level playing field, and it would be also very helpful when the EU Commission would force or would try to negotiate with the other regions for a level playing field. We don't want to have a race to the top concerning funding, but we would like to have a level playing field so that we have the same chances to perform with our products in Europe and the rest of the world. Supply chain resilience, what was just mentioned, is very important to us. We see that the Europeans have a very strong point in the machinery part, and also good resources in the R&D field, but we also see the resources as such, which are of importance, so that we get the resources within Europe to produce our chips in Europe, so that we can secure the supply chain resilience. And the EU Chips Act, which is very helpful, is aiming for a resilient position of the European chips companies within the international market, that also the European Union has a strengthened position while negotiating with others like the US. They have their strengths in different nodes like us. Well, I think we will come to that later on.
Thank you for these first impressions of what the Chips Act is considered for by a chip producer, a leading chip producer from the EU. I would now like to follow this up with Janine Bodelmann, who actually comes from, should I say, an SME in the semiconductor ecosystem, or what we in Germany would consider our German Mittelstand, and or came, I don't know if you want to say a few words on that, but from what I understand, you had big news in your company yesterday, but that is basically the perspective we're hoping to hear from you. What is it like for an SME in the semiconductor ecosystem? And when you hear about the CHIPS Act, what do you think are the most important points that should be made to create new opportunities for business?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yes, we are a small company at the moment, but since yesterday evening, we joined the Hansa Group as responsible R&D let's say, department for the whole group, and Hansa itself is an international company that does everything around electronics and mechanics production. So even before we had lots of contacts with electronics production, and now even more. Well, what does it mean for small and medium-sized enterprises to be in this ecosystem? Well, you compete with all the big ones. So somebody already mentioned the automotive industry. Well, they need chips, we need chips, and we all need the same. So basically we are competing against many others, which is rather hard. The thing is that I think many of the German or European small and medium-sized enterprises are not very specialized in their chips, so they need standard chips that are available. So we do not talk about extremely high-level personalized things, but about standard material, let's say. And in that case, the European Chips Act will probably not really help us, because as far as it's targeted now, it's targeting very specified technology and not the ones that we currently need. So and basically all the infrastructure that you need in this area in order to really work on the chip itself is extremely expensive, and for small and medium-sized enterprises it's not possible to just join and enter this market. So we are basically on the application side. We use these chips, but small and medium-sized enterprises normally will not develop their own chips themselves.
Thank you. You've raised some very interesting points, which I want to follow up on later on. But I now want to give the floor to Eva Meidel. As rapporteur for the EPP, you've published your opinion on the CHIPS Act proposal of the Commission just last Friday, from what I understand. And yeah, we're very interested in hearing more of that. What is your position? Where do you stand? What changes do you think are necessary to be made to the Commission proposal?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today. I think today's discussion, to a certain extent, and I'll be happy more during the discussion to dwell on the points that I've put forward so far. But I think today's discussion, to a big extent, has this overarching question: are we getting the CHIPS Act right? I think my initial assessment would be that we're getting there. I think to get this act right, we need to do exactly what we are doing today, to listen to the industry and to listen to the experts. And I believe, together with my team, this is what we have been doing over the past couple of months. We've been meeting with companies across the supply chain. We've been taking part in meetings and events such as this one. I have been able to do a number of field visits and feel the reality on the ground at research and production facilities. And what I have found, and this has been a very good basis for the understanding and for me to start working on the draft report, is that I found that there's a lot of efficiency, there's a lot of dynamism, there's a strong chips sector. It is certainly not as weak as headlines may suggest. And the reason why I say that is that we all here in this discussion know that we need to speed up production and design, that the overall percentage of chips that we need and the amount that we produce, it's not enough. But I think the European chips landscape has strengths that make it a major contributor to the global ecosystem. And by working in the right way on this act, we can amplify that concretely and boost those strengths. But of course, I am not naive in any way. By acknowledging this, I also acknowledge some of the risks we are facing. And these risks, if they're realized, they can translate into shortages, they could translate into bottlenecks. And this is why, for me, it's very important that those vulnerabilities are addressed. And this is why the CHIPS Act is a very welcome initiative. Some of the three main areas where I believe we will best succeed is by making sure that we could provide strategic support and investment where this is needed. By making sure and enhancing monitoring so that we avoid a crisis to happen in the first place. Thirdly, I think we need to avoid burdensome bureaucracy and make sure we increase flexibility for SMEs and the business as a whole. And lastly, a very important point, because of the complexity of the whole supply chain, we need to help create a truly international ecosystem. It was mentioned that my opinion in the Econ committee was already put on the website. Some of you might have seen it. And I hope to see that these priorities will be reflected further into that opinion and later into the actual report. I don't see our role as reinventing the wheel as legislators. I think we have to address the key vulnerabilities and then get out of the way to basically let companies do what they do best, and this is innovate. And this is part of the strengths that Europe has. I think semiconductors are absolutely crucial in driving forward our twin transition, the green and the digital transformation. And this is why, as I said in the beginning, this file is way too important not to be moved forward and way too important to fail.
Thank you. I have the impression that some of these things definitely might sound very good to the industry. We want to go further into detail in discussing these points. I'd like to ask Lucia the next question. And one of the things that has already been raised briefly is, what kind of chips do we need? When we're now talking about the CHIPS Act, one of the main elements is, I think it's the second pillar, security of supply, where we're talking about also attracting investment, attracting some of the biggest producers of semiconductors to open additional facilities here in Europe. And therefore, what is the Commission's view? What kind of chips are you proposing in the CHIPS Act that should be funded additionally in the future?
Well, we think that we need investment both for the production of more mature chips as well as for the more advanced ones. So if you look at the forecast in terms of needs of chips, we see that the demand is going to basically double by 2030. And this increase is driven both by more mature nodes and more advanced nodes. So the proposal of the Commission is that we are actually able to invest in both areas. We also make it clear, however, that if companies need to receive public support, then they have to be innovative. So we use this concept of a first of a kind, which means that we look favorably at public support when the investment that is supported is going to be first of a kind in the European Union, meaning that it's going to be innovative in the European Union. This doesn't mean necessarily lower nodes, but it means also lower nodes. It can also mean chips that are more mature, but that have new functionalities, or for example, they're more energy efficient, or they're more secure. And it can also mean innovation at the level of the processes in the plants that are more sustainable. So we present in the definition in the Act a large possibility for the kind of innovation that can take place, and that it would be captured by this definition of first of a kind. I do notice that a lot of people think we are only talking about lower nodes, and so I just want to highlight that this is not necessarily the case. We see the need for both, for different kinds of chips, but at the same time, it cannot be that we only focus on the development of mature chips, because technology evolves, and as the verticals are more and more industrialized, there will be a strong increase also in the demand of advanced chips for different application and different needs. And so we should also prepare for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm going to hand it over to Michael Ball to follow up on this question. What is Infineon's perspective on that? I do remember, for example, talking to representatives from a German ministry that were saying, if we're not going for the most mature node size, then we're just financing commodities, and we cannot finance commodities. That sounds a bit different to what we just heard from the Commission. I assume you're going to be happy to hear this, but tell us, what are your customers requesting? What kind of chips are they looking for the next couple of years?
Yeah, thank you very much. So we really welcome the position of the European Commission in that place, as it is very helpful to have more than more in funded or supported in the European Union. Infineon is very specialized in their chips, and we try to drive this forward through research and implement first of a kind chips or production facilities within the European Union. Just for example, a modern car has more than 1,000 different embedded chips of varying typologies nowadays. So there are some cutting-edge next generation semiconductors inside, but also very mature nodes, because they are very reliable. And also these mature nodes can be enhanced. We can, for example, work towards less energy consumption, which is very important for the new Green Deal to reduce the CO2 burden. And so it is very helpful that the EU Commission has taken this step towards the European industry and also opened up the EU Chips Act to the more mature nodes, as the Commission also knows that there is a great opportunity for us, for the European chip manufacturers, to grow in that particular field. But of course, we are also trying to go to lower nodes to have them more resilient. For example, if you take your mobile phone, there are very small nodes in the chips mainly, but they only work from a temperature variety from, let's say, +5 degrees to +35 degrees. And a car, for example, has to sustain a wider band of temperatures from -40 to +70 degrees. And we will research on the chips that they get more resilient, so that we can also go down to smaller nodes.
If I might just jump in, because I would like to come back to the sheer numbers, because apparently we are all happy with the idea to have very different kinds of chips that we like to produce in Europe. And then I would invite you to look at the sheer number that the Europeans are supposed to invest, and then look at the figures that TSMC alone will invest within the next 3 years. And this is 100 billion. The thing is, in this light, all the money that we are talking about here is a very, 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 very small portion of that is invested elsewhere. I don't want to say that we should not invest, but I want to say that we should focus and that we should think this as a first step in order to bring chip production into Europe. but this certainly cannot be the last step, and we will have to think about this continuously if we want to keep on track.
Well, maybe I'll let the Commission or the Parliament react to that directly. I don't know which one of you would like to step in and say a few words on how realistic it is to reach the 20% share of global production for the EU with the measures that have been proposed so far.
I can step in unless, Eva, you want to go first?
Go ahead, Lucia.
Yeah, okay. So, well, first of all, with reference to the numbers that Janine has just brought up, the $100 billion to be invested in Taiwan, on the basis of our calculations, we estimate that in the next few years, we will witness from the side of the European public authorities, so member states and Commission, a total investment of about 43 billion euros. That's what we have in our proposal, and which corresponds to about $50 billion. Now, this is public investment, which will leverage certainly at least an equal amount by the private sector. So I think that when it comes to size of investment, we are not that far away from other parts of the world. The United States are also investing about $50 billion in their CHIPS Act. And of course, this is to be leveraged by private investment. Will this help us to achieve our ambitious objectives? First of all, the objective is not so much about 20% of production capacity, of global production capacity, but it's about 20% of the market share in semiconductors. So it's not only the value of the production, but it also includes the value in design and the value in the whole supply chain of semiconductors, which is divided in different segments, where right now we have 10% of market share. And we really have an important ambition of achieving twice as much as our investment, because if you think that the demand is going to double, if we don't do anything in the European Union, we will fall to 5% of global market share, which is certainly not reflecting the economic standing of the European Union. So it's extremely important that we invest in semiconductors, in manufacturing, in design, in equipment, in raw materials, along the whole supply chain. And I really hope that our investments and our CHIPS Act will facilitate that.
Thank you. I would like to hand it over to Eva. If you want to react to that as well, feel free. Otherwise, I'd like to pose the question to you. When you're moving around in the Parliament at the moment and discussing these topics with your colleagues, is there already something where because we're expecting, I think, the rapporteur Danika's report only in September, but is there already something where you see a common position of the Parliament emerging, or what are the hot topics that are being discussed, maybe, or with different opinions between the different political groups in the Parliament?
Thanks a lot for this question on shedding a little bit more light in the works of the Parliament, but I have to say it's quite early days so far. I think in the same time we are, a very eager team to deliver. We've already visited IMAC together, but I think, the different shadow rapporteurs and respectively rapporteur priorities will be developing in the coming weeks and months. And this is why, again, your discussion is very timely to try to shape the discussion, and I'm happy to be among you. But of course, already there are some key issues being highlighted by industry in some of the parliamentary discussions that are happening. This is why when writing my econ opinion report, I had a couple of questions in mind. And one of them has already been mentioned. That was, do we exclusively focus on cutting edge? Or do we strengthen and build upon existing and rely upon technology while also looking into the future? also, how can we best future-proof this legislation? Is there enough EU investments to make the difference? That was another aspect that was touched upon already in this discussion, because for me, the funding is indeed limited. So the way I say that this financing should work is that on one hand, it should work smart, but it also has to work hard to make the most out of the available funding. Other questions that we posed before our team while preparing this draft is how can we better protect sensitive business information, especially if we want to improve monitoring of the supply chains with international partners. And of course, how can we ensure that the measures in Pillar 3 are only used in acute crisis situation, and more importantly, how can we prevent that this crisis from developing at the first place? How do we have enough foresight? So I have tried to provide some more clarity and guidance on these topics. But of course, the very big discussions are ahead of us. And there's still quite a long way to go. But I very much hope that the whole team understands how important the issue is, but also how complex the issue is in the same time.
Thank you for that. I think we are going to jump right to Michael, because that is a question very relevant to a semiconductor manufacturer like Infineon. The crisis measures that have been proposed in the third pillar of the CHIPS Act. How happy are you with those measures from your perspective? Are they proportionate? What would you suggest otherwise, in case you're not entirely happy with those measures?
So yeah, we're not entirely happy with it. As a company, we of course see that there is massive funding done by the member states and also in parts from the European Union as a legal body. And of course, they want to have something in exchange for it. But as a company in the semiconductor market, we would like to have a less burdensome documentation efforts in place, as this is of a quite high volume, and we wouldn't have it aligned, as is just mentioned, that we have the same documentation duties in front of, let's say, the US and the EU. Currently, the EU and the United States are working on the TTC negotiations, and this will be very helpful to have one set of data which should be delivered to each side and have this data secured as best as possible. That will be very helpful, and of course have a to have a less burdensome collection of data, and of course safeguarding our business. We don't want to display future developments in the chip market, what we are working on, to our colleagues from the other companies, which could be on display when the EU Commission is collecting the data. So that will be it.
If I can follow up on that, you've now talked about the mandatory data information requests that might come from the European Commission. If I mention two more things, like also the export controls that the Commission could decide at a certain time that you have to produce for the customers within the EU first before exporting, or also when we're looking at the possibility that you could be told which production or the production of which chips you would have to prioritize in a crisis. Is that something where you have, let's say, strange feeling when you hear that, or is that something where you say, no, we can work with that without any problems?
Well, we have certain strange feelings concerning that. So concerning export control, for example, we have a supply chain within our company. So, for example, the front-end production is happening in the European Union in factories like Villach in Austria or in Dresden in Germany, and then they are shipped to be diced and then put into these like things in the so-called back-end procedure, and they are shipped to Malaysia. It would be quite difficult if the EU Commission would stop the transport of the wafers to Malaysia for the further processing. That would cause some disruptions in the supply chain, and we are not able to build this up within the European Union. So the feasibility would be also one thing which should be kept in mind by the European Commission. For certain segments, we would be fine if there would be a pre-ordering or reservation for the European industries. We could live with that. But also the European industries, like the automotive industry, is working on a worldwide level. So like VW, they have a great exposure in China. How would the EU Commission would like to rule on that? So if they need chips for the Chinese production, though they're a German or a European company, it is hardly feasible to work with these recommendations in Pillar 3. So there we should really consider how to shape it properly, that the industry in a globalized world can operate with it.
Janine, would you like to? Oh, yeah. Did you want to jump in, Eva? Was that?
Yeah, because I thought you also asked the question towards me at some point, but if Janine wants to bring in a pointer, then I could. Yeah. Okay. No, I think that's a complex issue, and I think what Michal explained is something that I tried to consider in my draft report in Econ. But I also see the reasoning politically, especially, and not only why the Commission felt we need the Pillar 3. So you would see from my report that we sought to address these concerns so that they are merely a last resort, some sort of a safety net. And to be honest, I think this was probably the initial intention by the Commission. But I believe I managed to tighten up some of the language. The third pillar is one that I hope, and I said it before, we'll never have to use, because it will mean that there has been, either a major natural disaster or conflict that has seriously harmed supplies. I say that we never have to use because we have put other, ambitious ideas of how to monitor the supply chain early on enough. The proposals that I suggest are to ensure that we have a resilient industry where the governments and the industry itself can work together to monitor any pressure points early enough, that they can address them long before they actually become a crisis. Because overall, I see this act as a very strategic document. And so for me, things are very clear. I don't think the European Union has to wait for the bridge to collapse before you can fix it. you do it as soon as it begins to creak. So enhancing and giving the possibility to the European Semiconductors Board, giving industry a voice and a seat, making monitoring an effective way to prevent bottlenecks are some of the areas where I focus, in order for us to have enough foresight to avoid some of those crises that could potentially occur.
Thank you for that. Just a little reminder. Oh, sorry. Did you?
If I may add to that, so it would, from our perspective, make more sense to have a balanced pillar 3, not just for the chips industry, but overarching the whole industry. And there should be a law made for all industries in that place, as these crises can hit anyone else too. So a special law for the semiconductors is, from our position, not suitable.
Okay, thanks for that. Just a little reminder to our participants, feel free to raise your virtual hand to ask questions. Feel free to write questions in the chat. I can keep going with questions. Have these interesting panelists that I can use to finally have answers to everything I ever wanted to know about the CHIPS Act, but really we're here for you to have your questions answered. In the meantime, I want to ask Janine about something that was very interesting when you're running your company together with your husband, and when I discussed with him at some point about the proposal, he mentioned that the 2 billion euro fund that the Commission has suggested to put forward in order to finance startups and SMEs in the semiconductor ecosystem, that's something that is in general a good idea, but he said that still the hurdles for an SME to enter into really the semiconductor industry, they're so high, and especially if you want to start designing your own chips, he said even with this 2 billion fund being made available, the hurdles would still be so high that it would be relatively unrealistic still. Can you maybe help us out there a little bit and explain your view?
Well, he's right. But you should imagine that developing a new chip is work where you need laboratories for, you need to invest into people, and imagine that if you need a specialist who's able to design a new chip, you will probably not find these kind of employees easily on the market. And if you are in a small company, how will you find people like that? Normally you need more than one. And if you have these specialized people, then you would need them to do this specialized kind of work. And small and medium-sized enterprises normally do not need so specialized chips to that extent that it's feasible on a financial perspective to employ these kind of people. So it's manpower, and it's know-how, and it's the systems that you need around, the laboratories that you need in order to be able to do so. So basically, it's nice. It's a nice idea, but in our opinion, this will not help small and medium-sized enterprises to enter this specific market. Maybe it's nice for companies that already started doing this and now get some money out of it. I'm happy for them, but I personally do not know anybody who is going to, or who's thinking about entering this market and with this money will say, hey, let's go into it. I don't think that this is going to happen.
Could I come in? So I think that there are SMEs who design chips. They may not produce them, manufacture them, but they do design them. And we have a number of examples in the European Union. It is a costly activity, as Janine says, that is true. But these companies exist. And the reason why we set up this fund is to allow these companies to grow. So and by the way, if the fund is successful, then the European Investment Bank will make even more resources available. So it will be very important, especially in the first couple of years, to make sure that there is a pipeline of SMEs coming to use this budget, because it will then signal that it is important and more funding will be made available. This is a fund of funds, by the way. So I agree with Janine that it can be very expensive to have the infrastructure around you that allows you to design the chips. And it's for this reason, apologies, it is for this reason that with our first pillar, the Chips for Europe initiative, we want to fund, on the one hand, infrastructure for design, which makes tools available, in particular for SMEs, also pilot lines that can be used also by SMEs to even virtually test their designs, and possibly at favorable fees, so making a distinction to the kind of fees that SMEs face compared to larger companies. We also want to support a network of competence centers, and the idea of the competence center is that these are technology centers that can in particular help SMEs for their needs, and so they could help them also in terms of skills development or in finding, you know, links with universities and finding those people that could actually work and provide services to the SMEs. We also fund skills for microelectronics. Of course, it will take some time for the skills action to have a very significant impact, but we need to start because we've been talking about it for a long time. And then at the end, we never start. So let's start now and have some talent in the European Union for this kind of innovative future.
Great. I think I'd like to follow up directly with you regarding some questions that have been asked in the chat in the meantime. Stephanie Stündel from the German Industry Association or Federation is asking, how is a crisis defined? And are we currently in one, for example, that would, if we already had the CHIPS Act, would now be a time to activate it? And I'll connect that to a second question that has been asked in the meantime, where the question has been risen is, or brought up, if we are creating the right attractive investment environment for chip factories, or if, for example, the Pillar 3 is not something that, on the other hand, then will make investments here less attractive than elsewhere.
So I forgot your first question.
The first question was, how is a crisis defined?
Yes, okay,
and are we in one right now?
Well, whether the assessment of whether we are in a crisis, we would like to make it with the member states, not just alone. And this assessment would be based on the kind of economic impact that a crisis actually brings on, in particular, the way the crisis affects what we consider to be critical sectors. This can be healthcare, this can be critical infrastructure, you know, energy, telecoms, water supply, transport. So there are defense, which is now very important. So whether there is a crisis or not would depend very much on discussions that would take place with member states in the context of the Semiconductor Board. It would have to be triggered through an implementing act, which means that then there is also comitology with member states to decide whether it's a moment of crisis or not. And as Eva said earlier, these measures of the third pillar are measures of last resort. I know that companies may find them uncomfortable at a first reading. However, these measures exist in other parts of the world. I mean, the United States have these measures. All our European companies are also present in the United States, so they're subject to the same kind of measures in the United States. For us, as I said, it's a last resort, and therefore I don't think they should disincentivize companies from investing in the European Union, exactly because they face the same kind of requirements in other countries. And Europe will become, and is becoming, a more attractive place to invest, because we already have announcements of further investments, not only by non-European companies, but also by some European companies. And I think it's important. I think it's important that we can really facilitate these investments, facilitate the setup of the facilities, and then we will have to really very much work on the ecosystem, because the existence of the ecosystem is what will eventually really make Europe an attractive place to invest.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. If I might also chip in a little bit on that answer, because it builds already onto something I said, and then unfortunately I would need to leave right away. But so first of all, I don't think right now we find ourselves in such a crisis. You know, as I've mentioned, there has to be a very critical situation that is a crisis that significantly affects the whole union. And I think there has to be a distinction between a real crisis and things like whether it's a low stock or predominantly buying chips from other parts of the world. So for example, you know, the proposed text that I've put forward in the Econ opinion says that, you know, there has to be a serious disruption to the supply of semiconductors, leading to significant shortages of products or services, which lead to an extraordinary situation which poses a serious or immediate threat to the functioning, the health, the security, the defense of the infrastructure of the economy, of the institutions of member states and citizens of the union. So this is one suggestion, which probably there will be others building on it. But this is why, in what I already said, you know, what we are putting an emphasis is on the monitoring, and that's why it's so important through the board. That involves the industry as well. Because we have to be careful that the actions we take during a crisis do not create some sort of other larger problems and issues down the line, like reducing the confidence in the EU market or the European Union seen as protectionist. So it really has to be a serious crisis that our mechanisms that we'll put in place have not managed to detect. But of course, as I said, this is all early days into the discussion. So we're going to continue working in those avenues and see what else could be done to reassure the business on one side, but on the other hand, make sure we have some sort of tools should such a crisis occur, and hopefully it never does. Thank you for this discussion from my side. I unfortunately have to leave. I have a presidency meeting here in the group, which I have to attend, but my team will remain for the remaining time of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Eva, for participating and also for this last statement. And since our 1 hour that we have planned for this event is already nearing its end, I'd already like to hand it over to Ben Butters, CEO of Eurochambers, to give us a little bit of a summary and some final wisdom on our CHIPS Act event. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Christopher. Pleasure to be here. And I was listening into the discussions attentively. I will try to come up with some recurring themes and points that I picked up. But indeed, as Eva just said, the discussions are still ongoing, and it's clear that there are a number of areas that we need to fine tune still, despite the Commission's proposal and the initial reactions of the Parliament. There's still some way to go, clearly. A few of the points I picked up. The first one is about money, and a lot of this seemed to be indeed about money. Firstly, that we need a level playing field in terms of funding in relation to international markets. And secondly, that we need to use public funding to leverage private funding. Janine made the analysis with the comparison with the investments in Taiwan, and Lucia indicated that if we are successful in this leveraging, we can match those levels of investment. So that should be what we aspire to and what we work towards. The second point that I picked up was about crisis, preventing crisis and ensuring crisis measures included in that third pillar are only triggered at the right juncture and as a last resort. And I think, as in many of these aspects, dialogue seems to be very important in making those kind of decisions, and industry needs to be involved in that dialogue. Another point about the international context is that in the spirit of the notion of open strategic autonomy, we should focus on where Europe can compete and remain aware of the international ecosystem, international context and developments. We as Eurochambers feel that this is this aspect of international cooperation that merits more attention as the discussions evolve, but it's clearly very important that we remain aware of the place of Europe in the global semiconductor industry, and that we make sure that those lines of communication and dialogue and cooperation, not least transatlantic, work as effectively as possible. And then linked to this, it's essential that businesses are encouraged to innovate and to identify market opportunities. Of course, this is paramount to chambers of commerce. And that's why for us, and I think Freya alluded to this at the beginning as well, we need to get the balance right between targeted, proportionate public support and an unduly interventionist and prescriptive approach. Businesses need to be free to pursue the opportunities that they identify, and if the public authorities can help to enable this, then all the better, but that needs to be in a measured manner and again based on a strong dialogue. And finally, a point that we hear in many contexts, and it seems to be as important in this one as many others, is skills. We hear of skills shortages in many different sectors of the European economy, and they seem to be getting worse, not better, unfortunately. It won't be resolved overnight, but it certainly is something that merits consideration in the context of the CHIPS Act. So my last point, Christopher, before I conclude, is that dialogue is crucial, and that came out throughout the discussions, and in fact the very fact that we were able to organise this discussion today demonstrates the importance of dialogue, and that's why we would support Eva Meidel's recommendation to give seats to industry on the European Semiconductor Board. I think that would be a positive development, and one that we would certainly support. So thank you, Christopher, and back to you.
Thank you. I think that was an excellent summary of the points that we should all take home with us today. And with that, I think our meeting is closed. And thank you to all the participants that were here. Thank you to all the speakers for making the time to discuss with us. And yeah, good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you very much.